Well, hello everyone. I hope that you can all hear me okay. Welcome to this CARMA webinar in association with the PRCA Southeast Asia. My name is Andrew Nichols. I'm the Managing Director of CARMA Asia. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. The topic of discussion is measuring what matters in PR. And I'm going to cover why I believe that it's actually more important now than ever. Some of the challenges and the complexities that we might face, some pitfalls, things to be wary of in measurement and evaluation. I'm then going to talk about best practice, and for that I'm going to reference Amec, which is the Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. But I'm also going to try to augment that with some practical examples to give it a little bit more a practical feel. I'm going to reference some really good free resources that you can take back and use right away. There'll be plenty of time for you to ask questions at the end. And I'm also going to give you my email address at the end, so if anyone doesn't want to answer a question in an open forum, or if you just want to have a more in-depth discussion, then I look forward to hearing from you, and I would welcome you contacting me. Okay. I'm actually going to now switch my video off so that you can focus on the content. And before we get stuck in, just going to do a very quick introduction to CARMA, or a refresh for those that are familiar with us. So we're a global media intelligence company. We've been providing media analysis to organizations for over 35 years. Today we're on the ground in almost 48 countries, nearly 50 countries, either through one of our 18 client-facing offices, or via our network of correspondents or partners. We have over 500 full-time staff, and we deliver integrated monitoring, analysis, and evaluation services. We also have a market research practice, and through this global presence and our technology, we're able to comprehensively capture and evaluate print, online, social, radio, and television content globally in over 100 languages. One of the things I want to stress is that we're not a technology vendor. So it's a defining aspect of our distinctive position that we combine investment in our people as well as in our technology. And so CARMA combines cutting edge technology with intelligent, highly trained analysis and client services teams. And together with our global presence, that gives us a depth and a breadth to the service offering, and it enables us to highly customize our solutions to individual clients. And we work with a really wide variety of organizations, so multinational enterprises across all sectors, PR agencies, government and non-government organizations. And it's really nice to see that we have a number of different sectors represented on the webinar today. Let's get started. So, why is it important that we measure PR? One reason is that it enables us to demonstrate value. Okay? Measurement allows us to benchmark against previous performance or against our competitors. So it provides a context for better decision making. Now, that might have always been the case, but what we're clearly seeing is an increasing trend across all types of organizations for data-driven decision making. We hear all the time, don't we, that we're in an age of accountability. And I think now more than ever, especially given what's happened this year, leadership is demanding greater accountability and more demonstrable results from the budget and the resources that they are allocating. That's not just true in PR, it's happening across all areas of organizations, including logistics, engineering, finance, But what's really important from our perspective is that we don't want PR to get left behind or to get left out of those important decisions. Now, I think it's fair to say that when we're dealing with shifting mindsets, building reputation, behavioral change, there are just far more, there's far more subjectivity around those type of things when you're dealing with human emotions and mindsets, certainly compared to something like finance or logistics data. Finance tends to be full of more objective truth. So you either hit the budget or you didn't, okay? When you're dealing with human emotions and behavioral change, it's not quite the same thing. But for me, that's all the more reason that we want to be on the front foot, taking the lead in deciding what does good look like, which is another way of defining why we do measurement. We're trying to figure out what does good look like. But in the past, I think we probably haven't done ourselves a huge amount of favors in the respect that traditional PR measurement has typically focused on coverage volume, maybe some basic content analysis. It's been more quantitative than qualitative in terms of its insight. And we've shot ourselves in the foot by using things like AVE and PR value. And crucially, there's been very little or no link to organisational impact. And as you'll see further on in the webinar, a key factor in best practice media measurement and evaluation is demonstrating linkage to organisational impact. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this point, but as I have touched on AVEs, for anyone that is still being asked to deliver AVEs or PR value in your reports, if you're an agency and a client is demanding it, or if you're an in-house communicator and this is part of your evaluation, then I strongly suggest you visit bit.ly/say no to AVEs, where you'll find no less than 22 reasons why they shouldn't be used. The bottom line is there is no academic research that has ever been done anywhere in the world that supports the use of AVEs. So hopefully things have moved on in your organisations from the old school measurement that we were just looking at. And the media landscape has certainly moved on a hell of a lot. I think it's probably changed more in the last 5 years than in the previous 100. And there are just now, a huge variety of places we might choose to position our organisations to our target audiences. And that creates a lot of challenges with communications planning, but all these digital platforms also generate bucket loads of data. And so from a measurement standpoint, there are now far more metrics available to us that we may choose to use. We know, don't we, that Google even tells us 60% of web traffic is fake. It's bots. We know there are problems with fake followers on social media. Our colleagues in marketing are having a really hard time with the black box that is programmatic advertising. There's all kinds of problems with ad fraud and transparency in programmatic supply chains. The budget just becomes untraceable. So we need to be cautious, we need to be selective and strategic about what we choose to focus our attention on and to interrogate that data. And yes, always be measuring what matters. Now, it's probably unsurprising that there are hundreds of software vendors claiming to solve a lot of these challenges, selling automated measurement solutions to the PR industry. Now, for the most part, what these software as a service platforms do is they measure things like likes, shares, impressions, and mentions. If we rely solely on these kind of metrics alone, it doesn't actually get us very far beyond the basic traditional measurement that we were looking at just now. Now, I would argue their value is really to provide an index, okay? They can help inform short-term tactical execution. So, for example, if we're normally used to getting 250 likes on a post, and then it suddenly spikes to 25,000, then we can use that type of information to examine, did an influencer of particular note share our information? Do we want to think about the type of headline or subject matter that we use? That type of thing. But simply relying on a platform that counts things that are easy to count, not interrogating the data, won't necessarily help us drive the changes that we're trying to see for our organization. Now, as an exercise, I was thinking about Facebook likes in general and how they might correlate to enterprise value. Now, I was wondering how many of the world's top companies actually feature in a list of top 100 Facebook pages. So I looked at the top 100 companies by market capitalization and the top Facebook pages. And basically, there are 5 companies that feature in both lists. For anyone that's curious, they are Samsung, Coca-Cola, Disney, Netflix, and McDonald's. And actually, if you look at those Facebook pages, you'll also see that compared to other pages with similar levels of followers, they actually don't get that much engagement. And bear in mind that the top 100 companies include some really big brands with great communications teams like Apple, LVMH, Amazon, Visa, Pepsi, Tesla, L'Oreal, Toyota, so on and so forth. So, and I'm not actually sure you'd find many of those if you even looked in the top 500 Facebook pages. So we can debate the extent to which likes matter, what their value might be. That's up to individual communications teams to decide. I'm certainly not saying that you know, having a large social media following is a bad thing, but we need to be prepared to justify if we're going to use these types of metrics as an indication of value, we need to be prepared to justify that along with things like, you know, mentions and impressions. In 2010, Pepsi was the #2 soft drink behind Coke. And they were actually really starting to challenge Coca-Cola for the #1 spot. And that year, after 23 years, Pepsi after 23 years of Pepsi participating in the Super Bowl, they decided to instead divert $20 million that they would have otherwise spent into something they call the Pepsi Refresh Project. Okay, so they had been supporting the Super Bowl, sports sponsorships, TV spots, etc. Lots of different activity around that event. And instead they decided we're going to stop doing that, we pull out altogether, and they launched this project. And what the Pepsi Refresh Project was a CSR campaign, which was driven by social media. It was all about getting people to vote for worthy causes that Pepsi would then donate some of that budget to. And even though it was 10 years ago, it has a lot of the hallmarks of the things that we hear about and that are very in vogue today in PR, CSR, social media, engaging with the community. And as you can see, you know, it generated headlines like social media is the new Super Bowl, the Pepsi Refresh Project. Pass or fail, Pepsi Refresh will be a case for the marketing textbooks. So Pepsi was trying to position themselves as a socially conscious brand, as a brand that was able to have a conversation with consumers, something more essentially than simply a peddler of sugary drinks. And have a look at some of the metrics that they achieved. $2.9 billion impressions. This was over a period of about 8 months. 3.5 million likes, loads of tweets, 18 million visitors to the campaign website page, and 80 million votes on that website. Have a think about that compared to some of the metrics that you might see in some of your campaigns over a similar period of time. But the fact is that none of those metrics matter at all if your goal is to sell drinks. They'd forgotten about the most important metric. And when they did look at the sales numbers, sales had actually declined over the campaign period by 5%. They'd lost $500 million in revenue. And the worst thing was, they'd slipped from being number 2, snapping at the heels of Coca-Cola, to number 3 behind Diet Coke. To rectify the situation, they ended up spending an additional $600 million. And as part of doing that, they had to fire nearly 9,000 people, including the communications director. So I think what probably led to some of these decisions was that Pepsi were seduced by digital's promise of efficiency. So they had been spending money on TV and sports sponsorship. And sometimes, we hear people say, well, those things, they're not very efficient. It's not really possible to see whether people have actually even seen the activity. Well, it might have been more efficient. It might have been a more efficient way of reaching a lot of people, or even more people, for the same amount of money. But efficiency is not the same thing as effectiveness. Okay, so something that is efficient creates lots of metrics. You can see how many of this you got for that dollar, which is always the way that digital has been sold to us. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's as an effective way of communicating your message. And we need to think about what impact that activity is then having on our business. So just because something provides you with metrics or is easy to measure doesn't mean it's leading you in the right direction for your organizational goals. Another thing that I suspect was going on was that Pepsi were a bit seduced by a shiny new platform, bearing in mind this was 2010. And there's a great quote from the late, great David Abbott of BBDO about social media. And the point that he's really trying to make is that from a communication standpoint, digital platforms are essentially like tubes that you can push messages down, okay? And I think in our industry, we've been very guilty of obsessing too much about the tube, about the platform, than necessarily about what we're trying to do with it. So creativity matters. Creativity matters far more than the tube that you push the content down. If your position isn't right, if you don't have an engaging story, then you are unlikely to have the impact that you were aiming for. So far, I've talked about why measurement and evaluation is becoming increasingly important as part of communication skills, some of the challenges inherent in the current media and communications environment, and some of the pitfalls we want to avoid. Now, I'd like to talk a bit more about how to approach your measurement and evaluation from a best practice perspective. And as I mentioned earlier on, I'm going to be referencing Amec. For those of you that are not familiar, Amec is the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. It's an international trade body for organizations like CARMA, but many of its members are also PR agencies and also in-house communicators. And Amec puts a big focus on education and best practice, and also providing resources. And I'll be providing links to some of those resources a bit further on. One of the things that Amec did a few years ago was bring together several different PR associations, including our partners today, the PRCA, to create what became known as the Barcelona Principles. This is a set of 7 principles to guide communicators with their measurement evaluation practice. Okay, and this has actually been updated a few times since it was originally conceived, which is why it says 3-0. It's actually Barcelona Principles 3.0. The first principle is really the guiding principle, which is setting measurable goals is an absolute prerequisite to communication planning, measurement and evaluation. If we take that in combination with the second point, measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes and potential impact. I'll go over outputs, outcomes a bit further on, but potential impact is the key thing there. So one and 2 are basically saying we need to include measurement in the planning phase and be clear about, you know, the audience we're trying to reach, using research to understand them, setting clear goals about what we want to change and how that will impact our organisation. The third point, outcomes and impact should be identified for stakeholders, society and the organisation. So this is about properly defining impact, whether you work in a government ministry, charity or commercial enterprise. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all process. You must think about it based on your specific organisation. Principle 4, communication, measurement and evaluation should include both qualitative and quantitative analysis. So we're not just relying on the stuff that's easy to count. For example, looking at mentions. Mentions is clearly a quantitative metric, but we could also consider looking at dominance within those mentions. So if we have 100 mentions in the media for a given period of time, some of them might be passing mentions. We might be mentioned with a bunch of other companies that happen to be in our industry, but others could be feature stories, lead stories that are only about our company. So that's an example of a quantitative with a qualitative metric. Or reach in terms of, you know, how many of our target audience might we have reached versus stakeholder mindset. So combining the number of people that we might have seen our communications with how that has actually then impacted their thinking or their behaviour. Number 5, we've already covered. Number 6, holistic communications measurement and evaluation includes all relevant online and offline channels. So this is about integrated communications. Okay, communications is changing just as media is changing, as we covered earlier on. And a lot of the organisations that we work with at CARMA now are becoming far more integrated in terms of their comms teams. Well, certainly consumers don't think about platforms, they don't think about channels. Outside of our industry, no one really talks like that. And so, you know, if your colleague is doing a TV campaign, for example, then TV campaigns often drive search activity. So if I'm sitting in front of the TV and I see your campaign, I might grab my iPad or my phone and do a search for your product or service to find out more. And if I do that, I'm likely to arrive hopefully on a really good piece of earned media that the PR team might have worked hard to place. So, you know, consumers are behaving in a seamless way, moving between platforms. Therefore, communication and measurement needs to be integrated as well. And the final principle, communication, measurement and evaluation are rooted in integrity and transparency to drive learning and insights. So I think really this is about data privacy, being aware of any inherent bias that might exist in the data, and of course always observing best practice. And if you want to read more about these principles, there's actually a presentation you can download at that link at the bottom of the slide, which will give you more examples and probably better ones than the ones that I gave. So how do we begin to apply these principles in a practical way? Begin to decide ultimately what does good look like. So this is called the communications cascade, and it's really a process that you go through to define the metrics and the reporting structures that we're going to use. So obviously we start at the top, and we work our way through. What we don't do is dive into the tactical part of the process. We always start with a diagnosis of the situation, then we build our strategy, then comes the communications tactics, and we decide what proof points, what metrics, etc. we want to use to tell that story, okay? So let's imagine it's not COVID-19, it's 2021, the world has moved on, and we're an airline, okay? Now obviously an airline is going to have long-term purposes and objectives, such as becoming #1 in the market, the best airline in the region, making it easier and more comfortable for people to travel around, etc., etc. But let's take it from a more specific perspective, more of a campaign approach. Let's say we are launching a new business class service on some of our key routes, okay? So at the top, the organizational objectives, I think in a scenario like that would be pretty straightforward. They're going to want to sell high volume of business class seats at a high yield. And so before we move into what the communications objectives that could support that type of business objective, we need to think about what I call the diagnosis phase, okay? Now, if you went in to see your doctor and before you'd sat down, they started saying, prescribing really strong medication or saying that you needed to have some sort of operation, you might question whether or not they've done an accurate diagnosis. They don't have enough information to make those kind of decisions. Well, it's a similar thing here. We need to arm ourselves with enough information to really understand the situation and create some really strategic objectives. So in the example I'm providing about the business class launch, that would be things like understanding the features and advantages and benefits of our new service offering, okay? Looking at our competitors' offering, looking at our competitors' communications to see how do they talk about their business class service at the moment, how have they talked about it in the past. We want to make sure that we are not just coming out with the same perspective, otherwise we'll potentially won't seem as distinctive as we could do. It would probably include things like customer research. What do we know about the behavior of people that buy business class seats? That could be third party or it could be internal with our own customers. What type of media do our target audience consume? There's a website called Seat Guru, isn't there, where people give their opinions about different airlines and services. So arming ourselves with that type of information, we can then move on to the next phase, which is in the communications objectives, we want to set our strategy. Okay, and our strategy will define the specific target audience, the positioning to them, and what we're trying to achieve, the objectives, okay? We don't necessarily want to target everyone all the time in all circumstances. Usually wouldn't want to look at maybe more than 3 target audiences, but let's say 1 or 2 target audiences. And in this case, let's say the target audience is, primary target audience is the existing buyers of premium economy and business class tickets on our airline, okay? Our positioning to them is going to be something about the great service that we deliver, and our objective might be something like we want to raise awareness amongst that target group by 35% between the beginning of the campaign and in 6 months' time. So now we have a pretty clear strategy of what we're setting out to do. Then we can think about the tactics we're going to employ to deliver on that. So it might be we're going to invite some journalists from the key media we had identified to come on flights, experience the business class with maybe our leading brand ambassador or our CEO. We'll film that for social media, and we're going to do an email campaign to go out to our members, okay? And then once we've agreed on all of those, we can then decide how do we want to apply proof points and metrics to that to help really tell the story at the end, and to make sure that we are constantly measuring throughout the process against what it is we've set out to do. Now, the most important metric, I think, is how many people are buying the seats. And that's not something we should be shying away from, but we can also be looking at things like follow-up customer research, because our strategic objective was about awareness. We could also use search data, web analytics to see if people are visiting particular pages on the website to read more about our offering. We could be generating weekly media monitoring reports to understand if we're being featured in the media, how dominant we're being featured, are the right messages being transmitted in those communications. And we could look at social media to see if we have advocates or even detractors helping us to promote or criticizing the service that we have. So this communications cascade is a very straightforward process you go through to define metrics, but also reporting structures, being timing and styles of reporting that we want to use. And when we're setting objectives, we definitely want to be following the SMART principles. So you'll notice earlier on, I mentioned raise awareness by 35% amongst a specific target group within a specific time period. So raising awareness just by itself, that's not a SMART objective. And I mention that because I hear it a lot when we first start working with clients. They'll say, I'll ask what the objective of a particular campaign was, and they'll say, we wanted to raise awareness. And so naturally I will then ask, well, what was your level of awareness before you started? And actually often they say, well, we don't really know. So coming back to that quote right at the beginning from Lord Kelvin, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Obviously, you're setting yourself up to fail if you don't know what your awareness is to begin with. In the case of my example, it was a new service, so we can assume the awareness was zero. But that's something that we probably want to be looking at on an ongoing basis. And those SMART objectives need to be underpinned by appropriate metrics. Appropriate meaning metrics that support the activities and the objectives. So there's no single perfect metric that we can use in all instances to demonstrate value, only ones that are appropriate to the specific campaign. And when it comes to how we then present the data, I highly recommend really thinking about who is actually going to see this information. So is it leadership? Is it a particular stakeholder? Think about what is it that's actually important to them. You might have more than one version of the same report tailored to different stakeholders. You can check out this link here, storytellingwithdata.com. There's a book of the same name. That link actually will take you to the page. It's a really good book that helps, provides a few examples and some insight on how to present data in different ways and how to appeal to different types of stakeholders. But the point is, we don't want to just use the same kind of boilerplate report card. We want to present information in a way that that makes us look good. We want to do storytelling with data. And as an example, something that we do actually in CARMA for some of our clients' leadership teams is we create podcast reports. So actually creating an audio report so that they can listen to, between a meeting or on their way to work or whatever. Now, it doesn't actually have to be overly complicated in terms of how we present the information. And this is a very simple, but I think effective illustration of earned media driving a tangible outcome. So this was Honda E in the UK market, but it could just as easily be another type of consumer durable or really any product or service in any market. What we're doing here, I mentioned earlier on about impressions being good in terms of an index rather than an absolute indication of value. Here we're using impressions as an index against other metrics to look for correlations. So here we have the total number of impressions, essentially earned media coverage that mentions the Honda E in the UK for a given period of time. So underneath that, we've mapped it against the volume of searches for Honda E, again in the UK, obviously, within Google. And that data comes from Google Search Trends. That's an open source tool. Anyone can go on there, set their location, period of time, and so on and so forth. And so, and underneath that, we have the traffic to the honda.co.uk website, so that's the right domain for the market that we're interested in, with the yellow area indicating the volume of organic search. And as you can see, there's a very nice correlation between the media output, which is the media coverage, against people searching. So we're using that as a benchmark for relative interest. If you don't know about the Honda E, and if you're not interested in it, you're probably unlikely to be searching for it on Google. And as we can see, that's then actually contributing to people visiting the website. There's definitely more that you could do with this. We could look at what then happens once people have visited the website. Do they download a brochure? Do they request a test drive? Do they do other searches within the website that indicate they have certain needs or unanswered questions? And we do have some clients that also map this type of information against sales data. Now, you're not going to see a straight line down from earned media coverage to a peak in sales. I would doubt with something like motor vehicle. But again, we're using this on an ongoing basis. We're constantly measuring throughout the process. And so ultimately, we can start to map peaks or fluctuations in sales against this other information. You can also look at things like footfall in the dealership. Now, I mentioned Amec likes to provide resources to communicators. Here's two great examples. Both are freely available on the Amec website. The one on the left is the integrated evaluation framework. And this is an interactive a web application that helps you to walk through and map out that process we talked about earlier on with the communications cascade. On the right-hand side is what's called the measurement maturity mapper, or the M3 or M cubed. And the measurement maturity mapper is a great way of, particularly if you haven't sat down for a while with your leadership and as a team, maybe across different regions, and thought about what do we actually want to do with our measurement. This is a great way of kind of bringing people together and galvanizing leadership around your process. So it's completely anonymous, but you can go on and answer a few questions about how you're currently measuring your communications. And what it will do is it'll tell you where you stack up against peers that operate in a similar or the same industry, people in the same region. You can't see specifically which organizations, that's kept secret, but what it also does is it will give you, as you can see here, some practical advice immediately on the spot. It will deliver to you some tips and tricks that you could use to improve your current measurement plan. And to come back to this, essentially as you go through, this is interactive, so you can click on it. It'll provide examples and pointers for each phase of the process. Phases 1 to 3 are kind of what you're going to do. 4, 5, and 6 are the measurement that then supports the sort of activities and strategy. So objectives are, as we talked about earlier on, the organisational and the communications objectives. Inputs are things like the audiences that we're focusing on and the strategy that we're going to use to support those objectives. Activities, pretty self-explanatory, but we look at that across paid, earned, and owned. Don't forget, this is an integrated evaluation framework. Outputs are the results in the form of quantitative and qualitative measurement metrics from the activities. So that'll be things like the coverage you've generated, the percentage of your target audience you might have reached, message delivery, dominance. Ideally, you want to include benchmarking, so 20% more than previous campaign or last month or whatever. Outtakes is the evidence of the effect the outputs have had on our target audience. So having seen the coverage, or attended the event, whatever, have we increased awareness, deepened understanding, or increased consideration of our offerings. Okay, so you measure that through things like surveys, Google search data, social media behavior, and so on. And then the outcomes is, this represents the change in the behavior, having changed the mindset. So here you would have things like sales data, sign-ups, footfall, even something like job applications. And finally, organisational impact is the kind of, as a result of all this, how does that then tie up into change within the organisation? This probably you'd look at over a period of time. So it might be, we move from number 2 to number 1 in the market. Our reputation has improved around this particular area, or even things like we were able to increase our team size as a result of the success of our sales. But you don't have to follow the Amec framework slavishly. It is a best practice framework. You can see here a much more simplified version. You could do this on a whiteboard just as an exercise with your team in the office. Okay, so don't feel that you have to try and crowbar, what makes sense to you into the best practice framework. The idea of the best practice framework is that it should be broadly applicable across all regions and different types of organizations. You can and should adapt your measurement specifically to your organizational needs, remembering that's one of the principles in the Barcelona Principles. This is another example actually taken from some client work that we did at CARMA. Now this has been redacted, but you can see here a slightly different take again, adapting things a little bit. So after consultation with this particular client, we decided to break out each section into subsections. So here you can see we've got reputation, objective activities, etc., proof points, awareness and engagement. So there are different sort of tiers within there. And you can also see we've got these stickers indicating paid, earned, owned, SEO and internal communications. And this is a real life example. This is actually an award-winning example of using a measurement framework within a communications plan. So this is for the National Health Service in the UK, and it is a real life example, and it's all around a campaign called Missing Type, which was aimed at generating more blood and organ donors. Okay, and what they did, which I think was brilliant actually, was they collaborated with some famous brands. So you've got Green and Blacks, the chocolate company, Waterstones, the bookshop, even Downing Street at the top there, which is I'm sure many of you know the address that the Prime Minister, the road the Prime Minister lives on in the UK. But you can see that there are missing letters. So the O is missing from Downing, the B and the A is missing from Green and Blacks, A and O from Waterstones. And the reason for that was, if we look at the inputs here, there had been a 40% reduction in new donors coming forward over 10 years. And over 2,000 new volunteers were needed to meet the current needs that the National Health Service has. A pretty serious issue. Half of all current donors were kind of middle-aged and above. And another key point was that a very, very small percentage of donors were from Black or ethnic minority groups in the UK. So the objectives were, they needed to raise awareness of the decline in donor numbers. Just a note on that obviously we want to make that a SMART objective, so there would have been some specific targets in there, I'm sure. They specifically wanted to recruit 40,000 new donors in a month. And a key point was to raise a number of donors among the young and among ethnic groups. And the activity, as I mentioned earlier on, was built around partnering with different organisations to remove letters from their brand names. But the NHS also put out some pretty hard-hitting press releases about what happens when donor numbers fall down. They worked with some specific brand ambassadors, I think probably aimed at trying to appeal to certain groups of people within their target audience. So key thing there was placing those spokespeople within the press releases and offering them for interview to talk about the issue. And they also pushed out case studies, sort of feel-good stories about real-life donors who'd benefited from receiving blood or organs. And they also did events targeting ethnic minority groups. So here we have the outputs, outtakes, and outcomes. And the way that the NHS has chosen to structure that is they put their mainstream media coverage, which doubled, so that's a benchmark there, from 230 to 590 articles in that period. More importantly, they're looking at qualitative metrics here, so a large degree of those, a large degree of that media featured a key message or a spokesperson. And as I mentioned, I think the spokespeople were important to make sure that certain target groups actually paid attention to the information. 79% contained a call to action, which would have been driving people to actually go to the website and sign up to be a donor. And a large number of their key target audience were reached. The outtakes, they measured by people's attitudes and behaviors on social media. So that's measuring things like rise in social media posts and mentions of the hashtag, and also visits and bookings on the donor website. And let's look at the outcomes. Really, really strong performance. The registrations basically doubled. They increased their registrations for Black minority ethnic groups by over 150%. Young adults registrations more than doubled. And this might be more maybe of an organisational impact metric, but they used analysis from social media to make some changes to their website to make it more mobile optimized. So that's probably people commenting on social media that using the website on a phone was not particularly easy. And this is a slide from the report itself. So here you can see a really nice correlation between the number of new donor registrations, which at the end of the day is the only key, is the main metric, main organisational metric that matters, against mainstream media coverage. Also up here you can see that they've correlated social versus new donors, and they've also correlated social against mainstream media activity as well. Okay, so just to summarise some of the things we've gone through, organisations are now and will demand more accountability from all departments, including PR, and we want to be on the front foot of that. The environment we're operating in has changed massively. Far more platforms that we have to deal with now, places that people might be posting about us, etc. And technology can really help us gather huge amounts of data, sort it and process it. But we shouldn't rely purely on automation to measure. We shouldn't just count stuff that's easy to count. And our measurement practices need to adapt along with changes in media and the integration across PR and communications disciplines. Most importantly, we need to align PR objectives with the organisation, not measure in a vacuum, not simply rely on content measurement metrics. We need to see how that helps us illustrate driving value through the organisation. Our life will be made a hell of a lot easier if we implement measurement as a standard part of a planning process. So remember the communications cascade that we looked at earlier on. That helps us define success early, define what does good look like. It's also a good way to get internal stakeholders and leadership on board. The M3 tool that I mentioned, and I'll give you the link to in a second, is also a really good way of having that internal conversation so that you know that you're all on the same page, that what PR is doing is contributing to the organisation and that the metrics and methods of evaluation have been agreed to in advance by those that will then judge your performance. And I highly recommend, many of you may already be familiar with Amec, but if you're not, even if you are, go and visit the website and have a crack at using the integrated evaluation framework that we looked at earlier on. So that's the link to the direct link to the M3 and also the measurement framework. If anyone would like to have a conversation around their measurement and evaluation practices, then feel free to contact me. And if you so desire, you can also follow me on Twitter at that handle.